I was sitting in the den of a small suburban house in Ohio when my daughter-in-law walked in, picked up the remote, turned off the TV, and said, "Go to your room, old man." My son stared at his phone. I took my jacket, my truck keys, and left. The next morning, a man in a dark suit knocked on the front door, and she went pale. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second. If this story hit something familiar, tap like, or leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone in this. Have you ever been dismissed in your own family because you stayed quiet? My name is Daniel. I'm in the later half of my life, and for most of it, I've learned what it feels like to be present, but not valued. The television didn't fade out. It didn't warn me. One second there was light and sound, the next there was nothing, just a black screen staring back at me like I'd imagined it. I didn't flinch. I've learned not to. Sudden movements turned small moments into accusations. Instead, I stayed where I was, remote still in my hand, breath shallow, waiting to see if this was a mistake or a decision. She was standing there. My daughter-in-law didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her arms were crossed, chin lifted slightly, eyes already past me, as if I'd finished speaking before I ever opened my mouth. "Get out," she said. 2 words. No heat. No explanation. The kind of command that assumes obedience. I looked toward my son then. Not for rescue, just confirmation that I still existed in that room. He didn't look up. That was the moment that did it. Not her words. Not the TV. Not even the command. It was his silence. I felt it settle into my shoulders, heavy, familiar. The same weight I'd carried into meetings where my opinion was ignored. Into conversations where I was interrupted mid-sentence. Into rooms where my presence was tolerated, not welcomed. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what I'd done wrong. I didn't remind her whose house it was. I stood up. My knees protested a little. They always do now. I placed the remote carefully on the table, like it mattered. Like someone might care where it landed. I said. That was it. One word. Controlled. Almost polite. I walked to the entryway. Grabbed my jacket. My keys were on the hook by the door, the same hook they'd been on every day for years. When I lifted them, they rattled louder than I expected. The sound echoed in the quiet house. Still, no one spoke. I paused with my hand on the door. Just for a second. This was usually the part where someone softened. Where a voice said, "Wait." Or, "That's not what I meant." Or even, "Dad, don't." Nothing. So I opened the door and stepped out. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old carpet. The light flickered like it always did. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, letting the door close behind me with a dull thud. Only then did I exhale. In the stairwell, I stared at my reflection in the scratched mirror. I looked older than I felt. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. There was something about my eyes that bothered me, like they were waiting for permission. I didn't like that. The car ride was quiet. No radio. No phone calls. Just the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the road. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. At a red light, I caught my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Not from anger. From restraint. There's a kind of strength in holding back, but there's also a cost. That night, as the highway lights blurred past my windshield, I started asking myself questions I'd been avoiding for years. When did I become someone people could dismiss? When did my silence start sounding like permission? And why did I keep convincing myself that keeping the peace was the same as keeping my dignity? I didn't have answers yet. Just the echo of her voice. The image of my son looking away. The sound of the TV going dark. I pulled my truck into a grocery store parking lot I didn't recognize and sat there longer than I should have, engine off, hands resting in my lap. The quiet felt different now. Heavier. Like it was waiting for something. I didn't know it yet, but that silence was about to be interrupted. And when it was, nothing in that house would feel the same again. I didn't go back the next day. Not because I was angry. Anger would have been easier. Anger gives you motion, direction. What I felt was heavier than that. It was the quiet understanding that if I walked back into that house too soon, I'd be stepping into the same shape I'd been shrinking myself into for years. So I stayed away. I slept on a borrowed couch that night, staring at a ceiling I didn't recognize, listening to the hum of a refrigerator that wasn't mine. Morning came without ceremony. No messages. No missed calls. Just sunlight through blinds and the dull ache in my lower back reminding me I wasn't 20 anymore. As I sat up, the first thought that came wasn't about what she said. It was about the chair. There was a chair in that house, a wooden one at the edge of the dining table. It had a slight wobble to it. One leg shorter than the others. Nobody liked sitting there. It wasn't comfortable. It didn't match the rest of the set. That was my chair. No one ever told me it was. It just became that way. When guests came over, I was the one who moved. When the kids spread their homework across the table, my place quietly disappeared. When dinners ran long and conversations drifted into topics I didn't recognize anymore, I was already halfway out of the room before anyone noticed. I told myself it was fine. I told myself this was how it worked when you got older. You made space. You stepped back. You let the younger voices fill the room because that meant things were going the way they were supposed to. But sitting there alone that morning, I realized something uncomfortable. No one had asked me to move. I had volunteered. I made coffee in a chipped mug and stood by the window, watching cars pass on a road I'd never driven before. Each one headed somewhere with purpose. I wondered when I'd stopped feeling that. The house I'd been living in wasn't always tense. It didn't start that way. At first, there were conversations. Shared meals. Small courtesies that made me believe this arrangement could work. But over time, the tone shifted. My suggestions started landing flat. My stories got cut short. My presence became something to manage. "Dad, we'll handle it," my son would say. Not cruelly. Just efficiently. Like closing a browser tab you weren't using. I never fought it. Because fighting meant risking something worse than disrespect. It meant being a burden. That word sat heavy in my chest as the day stretched on. Burden. The thing no man wants to become. The thing you work your whole life to avoid. I remembered the years I spent working overtime. The weekends missed. The quiet pride of paying bills on time, of fixing things myself, of being the one others leaned on. Somewhere along the way, that role expired. And no one told me. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. "Everything okay?" That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a question that felt more like an obligation than concern. I stared at the screen for a long time. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that, too. What was I supposed to say? That I felt erased in his house? That his silence hurt more than her words? That every time I swallowed something to keep the peace, it carved a little more out of me? None of that would land the way I needed it to. So I didn't send anything. The afternoon passed slowly. I went for a walk through a neighborhood where no one knew my name. Lawns trimmed the same way. Flags on porches. The quiet order of American suburbia, everything in its place. It struck me how easy it was to disappear in places like this. You could live next to someone for years and never really be seen. By evening, the ache had settled deeper, not just in my body, but somewhere behind my ribs. The kind of ache that comes from realizing you've been accommodating yourself out of your own life. I thought again about that chair. About how no one noticed when I stood up. About how silence can look like maturity until it starts to look like consent. That night, lying back down on that borrowed couch, I made a quiet decision. Not a loud one. Not a dramatic one. Just a decision to stop volunteering to disappear. I didn't know yet what that would cost me. But I knew what staying quiet was already costing. And somewhere, not far away, the house I'd left behind was about to learn the difference. The silence between us stretched longer than I expected. I didn't hear from my son that night. Or the next morning. By the second day, the quiet had taken on a shape, thick, deliberate, almost careful. The kind of silence that isn't forgetfulness. The kind that waits for someone else to make the first move. I knew that pattern. I'd lived most of my life being the one who closed the distance. The one who checked in. The one who smoothed things over before they hardened into something permanent. It was a habit I'd built when he was young, when storms scared him, when scraped knees needed more reassurance than bandages. But this time, I didn't reach out. Not out of pride. Out of fatigue. I spent that morning driving aimlessly, letting the radio cycle through stations without settling on anything. Every song sounded like it was written for someone else. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror again. Same tired eyes. Same question behind them. When did my voice start carrying less weight than my silence? Around noon, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. I pulled into a gas station and shut the engine off before answering. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to make sure I could leave if the conversation went the way I expected. "Dad?" he said. Just that. No warmth. No tension. Neutral. "Hey," I replied. A pause followed. I could hear movement on his end, keys, maybe. Or papers. The sound of a life continuing without interruption. "She didn't mean it the way it sounded," he finally said. There was. Not a question about how I was. Not an acknowledgement of what happened. Just a correction. A reframing. An attempt to sand the edges off something sharp. "I heard it the way it was said," I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. "You know how she gets when she's stressed," he added. "The kids, work, it's been a lot." I closed my eyes. I knew that sentence. I'd used versions of it myself over the years. At work, in marriage, with people whose behavior I was quietly excusing because confrontation felt heavier than endurance. "I understand stress," I said. "I don't understand being told to leave." He sighed. Not angrily. Wearily. As if this conversation itself was an inconvenience he hadn't budgeted time for. "Can we not make this a bigger thing than it is?" he asked. That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a subtle recalibration inside my chest. Because I realized then that to him, this wasn't a moment. It was a disruption. A complication in an otherwise orderly life. "I didn't make it anything," I said. "I just left." He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice dropped. "You didn't have to go." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it revealed something important. He genuinely believed that staying silent and staying put were the same thing. "I was told to," I said. Another sigh. Another attempt to move past it. We'll talk about it later," he said. "Okay. Later." That word has ended more conversations than anger ever has. "Okay," I said. We hung up soon after. No resolution. No apology. Just the mutual understanding that the topic had been shelved. I sat there in the driver's seat for a long time after the call ended. The smell of gasoline hung in the air. A truck pulled in beside me, music blasting, someone laughing inside. Life uninterrupted. I thought about all the times I'd defended my son without him knowing. All the compromises I'd made so he wouldn't have to choose sides. All the moments I'd stepped back so his life could move forward smoothly. And I wondered when that quiet support had turned into expectation. That afternoon, I stopped by a park and sat on a bench overlooking a baseball field. Kids ran bases with uneven confidence. Parents shouted encouragement from folding chairs. I remembered teaching him how to catch. How he used to look back after every throw, checking to see if I'd noticed. I always had. But somewhere along the way, he stopped looking. It wasn't cruelty. That was the hardest part. It was comfort. The comfort of knowing I'd absorb whatever friction appeared between him and the rest of the world. I'd made myself safe to disappoint. As the sun dipped lower, I felt something unfamiliar settle in. Disappointment, not in him, exactly, but in myself. For teaching him, unintentionally, that my presence was optional. That evening, I received a message. "Let's give it a few days," he wrote. "Everyone needs to cool off." I stared at the words. Cool off. As if what happened was heat instead of harm. I didn't respond. For the first time, the silence wasn't accidental. It was chosen. And that choice felt heavier than anything she'd said to me. Because it meant accepting something I'd been avoiding. If I wanted to be respected, I couldn't keep training the people closest to me to look past me. That night, lying awake, I understood something with painful clarity. This wasn't just about a chair. Or a television. Or a single sentence spoken too sharply. It was about years of looking down at the floor, taught, practiced, perfected. And if I didn't lift my eyes now, no one else ever would. Distance has a way of clarifying things. Once I stopped waiting for my phone to buzz, the hours began to stretch differently. They didn't feel empty. They felt exposed. Like I'd removed a layer of noise that had been masking something uncomfortable underneath. I didn't go back to the house. Not because I was trying to make a point. Not because I wanted them to miss me. I stayed away because I knew myself well enough to understand what would happen if I returned too soon. I would explain. I would soften my words. I would shrink. I'd done it before, walked into rooms with prepared humility, ready to absorb whatever tension existed so others wouldn't have to carry it. I'd convinced myself that restraint was maturity, that patience meant endurance. But there's a thin line between restraint and erasure, and I was standing right on it. I spent the next day moving through places where no one knew my story. A hardware store. A diner off the highway with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone Han. I ordered eggs I didn't really want and drank coffee that tasted burned, watching strangers come and go with their own quiet problems. No one looked at me like I was in the way. That felt new. In the diner, a man a few stools down complained loudly about his job. Another nodded along, offering advice no one had asked for. They argued lightly, laughed, moved on. I realized how long it had been since I'd spoken freely without worrying how my words would land. Silence, I was learning, isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just deferred conflict. As the afternoon wore on, memories surfaced uninvited. Times I'd chosen the back seat, at work meetings, at family gatherings, even in my own marriage years ago. Moments when I sensed a line being crossed and told myself it wasn't worth addressing. Each time, the cost felt small. Accumulated, it was everything. I drove aimlessly again, ending up near the edge of town where developments give way to open land. I pulled over and shut off the engine, letting the quiet settle around me. I thought about the word dignity. Not the loud kind. Not pride puffed up for display. The quiet kind that lets you sit with yourself without apology. Somewhere along the way, I'd traded that in for approval. I checked my phone. No new messages. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how steady I felt. There was sadness, disappointment, a dull grief for the version of family I'd hoped we were building. But underneath it all was something else. Relief. Because for the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next dismissal. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in muted colors, I made a decision that didn't feel brave, but felt necessary. I wasn't going to chase understanding. I wasn't going to explain my worth. And I wasn't going to re-enter that house until I could do so without negotiating my self-respect. If that meant being misunderstood for a while, so be it. If that meant sitting alone with uncomfortable truths, I could handle that. I'd handled worse. I thought again about my son. About how easy it would be to send a message smoothing everything over. A few careful words could restore the old balance. The familiar imbalance. I set the phone face down. The choice felt heavier than any argument. Because it meant accepting that silence, when chosen deliberately, carries consequences. You don't get to control how others fill it. But you do get to decide whether you'll beg to be heard. That night, I slept deeper than I had in days. Not because things were resolved, but because something inside me finally was. And somewhere beyond my awareness, forces already in motion were heading toward that house. I just didn't know yet how loudly they would knock. The place I ended up wasn't meant for staying. It was one of those roadside motels that tries not to look like what it is. Fresh paint over old wood. Curtains washed thin from too many summers. The kind of place you choose when you're not running, but you're not ready to go home either. I parked the truck beneath a flickering light and sat there with the engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. For a moment, I considered driving away again. Just keep moving. Make motion stand in for decision. Instead, I took the key. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cleaner and something older underneath it. I set my bag down, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the quiet arrive on its own terms. No television. No familiar walls. Just the low hum of an air conditioner and the sound of my own breathing. This was the first night in years I wasn't sleeping under the same roof as my son. The thought landed heavier than I expected. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, tracing a crack that ran like a thin river from one corner to the other. My mind did what it always does when the lights go out. It reached backward. I remembered nights when he was small. How he used to pad down the hallway after a bad dream, blanket dragging behind him. He'd climb into bed without asking, curl up against my side like the world made sense as long as I stayed still. I stayed still. I'd learned early that being needed feels like purpose. That lesson had carried me through decades. Through work I didn't love but showed up for anyway. Through responsibilities that never asked if I was tired. Through relationships where consistency mattered more than applause. Somewhere along the way, being needed became being useful. And being useful became being optional. I turned onto my side, listening to a car pass on the highway outside. The sound faded quickly, like everything does if you let it. I wondered if they were talking about me back at the house. Not with concern. With logistics. Who would take out the trash? Who would pick up groceries? How much quieter the evenings were without having to accommodate another presence. The thought stung, but it also clarified something. If my absence simplified things, then my presence had been tolerated, not chosen. That was a hard truth to sit with. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. No apology. No explanation. No request that I come back. I imagined what it would look like if I did. Walking in quietly. Acting like nothing had happened. Taking that same chair. Lowering my voice. Making myself small so the household could return to equilibrium. The image made my chest tighten. Not with anger. With exhaustion. I realized then that part of me had been waiting for permission to stop. Permission to stop absorbing discomfort. Permission to stop being the easy one. Permission to stop pretending that endurance was the same as strength. The room felt colder as the night deepened. I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Thoughts kept circling, slower now, heavier. I thought about all the moments I'd stayed quiet because speaking up felt inconvenient. To others and eventually, to myself. Each silence had seemed harmless on its own. Together, they'd built a pattern. And patterns teach people what to expect. Sometime after midnight, I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. The light was harsh. Unforgiving. I welcomed it. I wasn't interested in comfort anymore. I wanted clarity. I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding. If nothing changes, if I keep choosing silence, keep smoothing things over, what does the next year look like? The answer came quickly. More of the same. Another chair at the edge of the table. Another conversation I didn't quite belong in. Another quiet exit justified as maturity. I turned the lamp off. That future felt smaller than the room I was in. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and broken. I woke just before dawn to the sound of someone starting a truck outside. The sky was barely light. The world felt paused between decisions. I sat up slowly, joints stiff, and let the morning settle. For the first time since leaving, I didn't feel like I was floating. I felt grounded. Not hopeful. Not optimistic. Just clear. I showered quickly, dressed, and sat on the bed again before leaving. There was a stillness inside me that hadn't been there before. A sense that something had been set down. I wasn't chasing reconciliation. I wasn't rehearsing speeches. I wasn't preparing to defend myself. I was letting go of the need to be needed. That, I realized, was the most dangerous thing I could do. Because once you stop needing approval, people notice. They feel the shift even if they can't name it. As I checked out and stepped back into the morning air, my phone buzzed. A notification. Not from my son. From a number I didn't recognize. I didn't open it right away. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool air, aware, deeply aware, that whatever was coming next would arrive whether I was ready or not. I started the truck and pulled onto the road. Behind me, the motel disappeared quickly. Ahead of me, something unavoidable was already in motion. By the time the sun was fully up, the decision had already been made. It didn't arrive with ceremony. No dramatic moment in the mirror. No speech rehearsed under my breath. It settled quietly, the way truth usually does when you stop arguing with it. I wasn't going to explain myself anymore. Not to my son. Not to his wife. Not to anyone who had already decided who I was in their life. I drove for a while with that thought riding beside me, steady and unmoving. Traffic built as the morning went on. Commuters in their routines. Coffee cups in cup holders. Faces set for days that would unfold predictably. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. I pulled into a small park just outside town and sat on a bench overlooking a pond. The water was still, broken only by the occasional ripple from a bird landing or lifting off. I liked that. Movement without noise. Action without disturbance. That was what I wanted to become. I checked my phone again. The message from the unknown number was still there. Please call me when you have a moment, it read. This is Michael Harris. No explanation. No urgency spelled out. Just a name. I didn't call back. Not yet. The old version of me would have responded immediately. Asked questions. Tried to get ahead of whatever problem might be forming. Preparation through anxiety. Control through compliance. Instead, I sat there and watched the water. I thought about how many times I'd over-explained myself in my life. At work, justifying decisions no one questioned from others. In relationships, narrating my intentions so they wouldn't be misunderstood. At home, softening truths before they ever had a chance to stand. Each explanation had been an attempt to earn comfort. But comfort bought that way is temporary. Respect isn't. I realized something uncomfortable as I sat there. People had gotten used to me translating my boundaries into apologies. And as long as I kept doing that, they'd never learn the language of consequence. Around mid-morning, my son called again. I let it ring. Not out of spite. Out of alignment. I wasn't ready to speak until I could do so without negotiating myself out of the conversation. A few minutes later, a text followed. Can we talk today? I read it once. Then again. I didn't respond. That choice carried weight. I felt it in my chest, solid and unfamiliar. This was what restraint actually felt like. Not suppression, not fear, but control. The day unfolded slowly after that. I ate when I was hungry. Walked when I felt restless. Let my thoughts come and go without chasing them down. Every so often, a flicker of guilt surfaced. You should say something. You're making this worse. This isn't how fathers behave. I let those thoughts pass. They were old scripts. Written for a version of me that no longer fit. By late afternoon, the air shifted. Clouds rolled in, dimming the light. The world felt like it was holding its breath. That's when my phone rang again. The unknown number. I answered this time. Mr. Reynolds? A man's voice asked. Professional. Measured. Yes, I said. My name is Michael Harris, he continued. I'm calling regarding a matter connected to the property on Cedar Lane. The house. I said nothing. I was hoping we could speak in person, he added. If you're available tomorrow morning. There was something in his tone. Not alarm, not threat. Just certainty. I'll be there, I said. We agreed on a time. A place. The call ended. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment after. So this was it. Not the confrontation I'd imagined. Not raised voices or slammed doors. Something else. Something that didn't need my explanation to exist. That evening, I drove past the house. I didn't stop. Lights were on inside. Curtains drawn. From the outside, it looked peaceful. Orderly. Like nothing had fractured at all. I felt no urge to go in. For the first time, my absence wasn't a protest. It was a boundary. I parked a block away and sat there briefly, hands resting on the wheel. I thought about how often I'd mistaken proximity for connection. Being present hadn't protected me. Being clear might. As I pulled away, I felt something settle into place. Whatever came next, whatever truth the man in the suit was bringing with him, I would meet it without explaining myself. No justifications. No rehearsed humility. Just steadiness. And that, I understood now, was where real power begins. He arrived exactly on time. 10 o'clock. Not early. Not late. I was already there, parked across the street from the house on Cedar Lane, watching the front door like it might do something on its own. The morning was clear, the kind of quiet suburban calm that makes everything feel smaller than it is. Then the black sedan pulled up. Unmarked. The kind of car people don't notice until they do. The man stepped out slowly, adjusting the cuff of his suit as he did. Mid-40s, maybe. Calm posture. Nothing rushed about him. He didn't look around like he was lost. He knew exactly where he was. He walked up the path and knocked. I couldn't hear what was said inside, but I saw it. The door opened. My daughter-in-law's shoulders stiffened. Even from across the street, I could see it, the hesitation, the sudden recalculation. The confidence she carried so easily with me wasn't there now. In its place was something tighter. The man spoke. She didn't interrupt. My son appeared behind her, confusion written plainly across his face. He looked older than he had a week ago. The door stayed open. I got out of the truck and crossed the street. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just steady. I didn't announce myself. I didn't need to. The sound of my footsteps was enough. When I reached the porch, the man turned first. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, extending a hand. "Michael Harris." I shook it. His grip was firm but brief. Professional. "I'm glad you could make it," he said. My daughter-in-law looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "What's this about?" my son asked. The man glanced between us, then stepped slightly to the side so we all stood in the doorway together. "I represent the estate division handling the property here," he said calmly. "There are a few matters that require clarification." No accusation. No drama. Just facts. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "This house," he continued, "is still legally registered under Mr. Reynolds' name." The air shifted. My daughter-in-law's mouth opened, then closed again. My son looked at me, genuinely startled. "That's not," she started. "It hasn't been transferred," the man said gently, cutting in without raising his voice. "Nor has there been any formal agreement altering ownership." Silence filled the doorway. I felt my son's eyes on me, searching for explanation. I didn't give him one. Because for once, the truth didn't need my narration. "You told me," my daughter-in-law said, turning to my son. He didn't answer. The man continued, "There are also concerns regarding unauthorized decisions being made on the property. Changes. Restrictions. Occupancy terms." Each word landed carefully. Deliberately. "I've been asked to ensure everything is properly aligned," he finished. No threats. Just inevitability. My daughter-in-law's posture collapsed slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal the strain underneath. She looked at me then. Not with anger. With calculation. "Why didn't you say something?" she asked. The question hung there, heavy with implication. I met her eyes. "I wasn't asked," I said. That was it. No explanation of my intentions. No defense of my silence. No reminder of what I'd endured. Just a statement of fact. The man cleared his throat softly. "We can discuss next steps inside, if that's all right." No one moved. Finally, my son stepped aside. We went in. The living room looked exactly the same. Same couch. Same table. Same television. The chair was still there. The one that wobbled. I didn't sit. The conversation that followed was calm. Procedural. Paperwork. Timelines. Options. My son asked questions. My daughter-in-law stayed quiet. I answered only when spoken to. Not because I was withholding. Because I no longer needed to fill the space. At one point, my son looked at me again. His voice was lower now. "Dad, why didn't you tell us?" I considered the question. Because it was sincere. "I didn't think it mattered," I said. "That wasn't punishment. It was honesty." When the man in the suit finally closed his folder and stood to leave, the balance in the room had shifted completely. Not because I'd raised my voice. Not because I demanded respect. But because I hadn't chased it. At the door, Michael Harris shook my hand again. "We'll be in touch," he said. I nodded. As the door closed behind him, the house felt different. Smaller. Quieter. And for the first time since I'd walked out days earlier, no one told me where I should go. After the door closed, no one spoke right away. The house settled into a kind of stillness I hadn't felt before. Not the tense quiet that waits for an argument, but the kind that comes after something irreversible has already happened. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand, listening. My daughter-in-law was the first to move. She went to the kitchen, busying herself with nothing in particular. Cabinets opened. The sound was deliberate, like motion could replace certainty. My son stayed where he was. "Dad?" he said finally. I turned to him. He looked older now. Not aged by time, but by consequence. The kind that doesn't show up on your face until you realize something important has shifted and you didn't cause it. "I didn't know," he said. I believed him. And for the first time, that didn't change anything. "I know," I replied. That was all. No lecture. No inventory of past sacrifices. No reminder of how many times I'd stayed quiet so his life could stay smooth. Because this moment wasn't about settling old accounts. It was about deciding what came next. He waited like he expected more. I didn't give it to him. Silence has weight when you stop using it to protect other people. "I should have said something," he added. "Yes," I said. The word landed between us. Undeniable. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. From the kitchen, my daughter-in-law watched us without speaking. Her expression wasn't hostile anymore. It was guarded. Measuring. Like someone realizing the rules they were playing by had changed without notice. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. The wobbly one. I didn't sit in it. "Are you staying?" my son asked. I thought about the question. Staying used to mean endurance. Putting up with discomfort in exchange for proximity. Being available at the cost of being diminished. "No," I said. "Not like this." That wasn't rejection. It was clarity. "I'm not leaving angry," I continued. "But I'm not coming back invisible." My daughter-in-law looked down. My son swallowed. Neither argued. That told me everything. I walked to the door, then paused. Not because I needed permission, but because I wanted to leave something behind that mattered. "You're my son," I said, meeting his eyes. "That doesn't change." He nodded again, faster this time. "But the way we live together does," I added. I opened the door. The afternoon air felt lighter than I expected. The neighborhood looked the same, lawns trimmed, cars parked neatly along the curb, but I felt different moving through it. Unburdened. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I only knew where I wasn't returning to. In the days that followed, things settled. Not magically. Not perfectly. There were calls. Conversations. Awkward pauses where old habits tried to reassert themselves. I stayed calm. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I chose where I showed up and where I didn't. Respect didn't arrive all at once. But it arrived. Quietly. I moved into a small place of my own not far from town. Nothing fancy. Orderly. A space that felt like mine without asking anyone else to confirm it. When my son visited, he knocked. When he spoke, he listened for the answer. And when silence filled the room, it no longer meant I was disappearing. It meant I was choosing my words. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to that moment, the sound of the TV going dark. How small it felt at the time. How final. I understand now that it wasn't the end of anything. It was the line. The point where patience stopped being self-sacrifice and became self-respect. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand anything. I just stopped volunteering to be diminished. And that changed everything.